Hi, Lisa Gifford here, and today we're going to learn how to do the LeMoyne star with the Martelli LeMoyne star template set. The supplies that you're going to need to make your LeMoyne star is going to be the LeMoyne star template set by Martelli. You're going to need a rotary cutter, some scissors. You're going to need a marking pencil, and it would be good to have it, depending on the color fabrics that you use, you might need some different color leads. I'm actually using the Martelli marking pencil. I believe it's a chalk pencil, and it actually, or ceramic, and it has different colors. It's got a white, yellow, blue, and a red. So for whatever different color fabrics that you're using, you'll be able to see your marks. And I'll get into why you're going to need that in a minute. Some pins that might be helpful. Of course, fabric. You're going to need an iron, an ironing board. Of course, your sewing machine with coordinating colors. But this is the basic supplies that you're going to need to be able to make the LeMoyne star. Now, LeMoyne star has been around a long time. It is one of those really old blocks. And there are all kinds of different ways that I've seen the LeMoyne star done. The one I'm going to show you today is the one we're actually going to be dealing with the Y seams. There are cheater LeMoyne stars out there that you're doing the whole thing with half square triangles. This one here, we're actually going to show how to use with the templates to make the Y seams. What Martelli has done is created a template that has these registration marks on here so that you'll be able to mark your fabric to be able to do your Y seams, and it's going to make it so much easier and so much faster. So there's a little bit of prep work that we have to do. On the back side, full instructions gives you everything on what you need to do in the cutting, in the marking of the fabric, and then in the sewing of it all together. So I'm going to open up it so that you can see what I'm talking about. Of course, just like all of the Martelli templates, they all have that fabric get-a-grip on the back. So you can cut multiple layers. This is a project, though, that if you're going to be using the registration marks, you can only cut one at a time if you want to be able to mark all of your fabric. So here's the template here. I'm putting it in the right order for you. So it's got all of these registration marks in here. So that is showing your 1/4 inch stopping and starting. And there I have them on the squares, on the triangle here, and on each pieces for here. They've got them on these corners here. So you got your 2 pieces to make the legs of the star. Now, with the get-a-grip, that little hole has not been drilled all the way through. So if you're going to use those registration marks, it is recommended that you go ahead and you get those cleared out. I found it was kind of the easiest if I got my little pointy scissors, and I'm not going to start from the back side because I don't want to push it completely off. I'm just kind of finding my spot right here, knowing that so it pokes all the way through, and then I'm just kind of giving it a little bit of a twist, and it gets that hole filled out a little bit better. So I don't want to go from the front side because I don't want to unseal it here, so I kind of do it from the back side, find my little spot, and I just kind of twist around. You could use like a little screwdriver, like a little tweaker screwdriver, or something that you could do that you can mark that hole, because what we're going to do is when we go to cut out our pieces, we're going to take the Martelli pencil and we're going to drop it down in there, and you'll see it goes all the way through, so I'll be able to mark each one of my spots with it. So whatever you want to use for marking with, but the Martelli marking pencil works really good because you can extend that lead out a little bit to get in there to do that mark for you. So that's the first prep work that you need to do on all of your templates. So the next step, let me talk a little bit more. Again, the LeMoyne star has been out forever. So you're going to have these perfect points right here. And of course, we're talking about a template, so every single cut is going to be absolutely perfect. I want you to show you some of the examples that we have here showing the LeMoyne star. These are panels here that we had made a couple years ago that went to, I want to say, one of the big trade shows. So here, it's one of those blocks that you don't necessarily have to do it in just solid colors. You could just have fun with it with different prints. The thing is, try to get some contrast in the look that you're wanting to be, but those are just absolutely beautiful, how they just turned out so very well. So this one here is showing it with some, again, one of my favorite fabric lines is from Timeless Treasures. So these are some of the fabrics that I saw that they've used in here, And then over here I've got it in some beautiful butterflies with some, this one has great contrast right here. So again, this is just a great project. You can make it for a table runner, you can make a bunch of them for a quilt, you could use just one center block for a pillow because it actually finishes or unfinishes at 18 inches. So when the whole block is completed, it's 18 inches. I'm going to show you one more thing before we get into making it. You know, this is an example of, I'm going to pull this up so Zeke can see it. So here, the very center is the LeMoyne star, but this quilt is actually called a carpenter star. So the way you add to it and extend it out, you make this beautiful design as you keep going. So just the very center is the LeMoyne star, and then you just continue making your blocks and pieces and you make what is called a carpenter star. And there's some great patterns out there. I think you can even find, like, you go to YouTube, you'll find some directions on making the carpenter star. So that's some of the examples of the LeMoyne star. It's a very old pattern, it's been around forever. Back in the day, they sewed all this by hand. So we're going to make it nice and quick and easy by using our sewing machine. So I've got my templates here. I'm going to pull out this set here because I already got all my registration marks made on all of these. So this is my set here. And so all you have to do is just cut out your fabric. Now the instructions state to cut out each piece one at a time from the wrong side, from the back side. Because from the back side, of course this would be nice and ironed, but it's been folded up in my bag. So you're going to just, if you want to mark all your registrations, you need to see them from the back side as I've done here. So if you can see, there's little red dots at each corner. Now the funny thing is, you actually only need one of those registration marks when you're putting it together. You only need it for this piece right here. So if you're doing a project and you know if you want to just do one point, then you could just do one. But we've got them on all four corners of the square. So you just set it down one fabric at a time from the back side, and then you just cut it out. And again, the ease of cutting with the Martelli. And I recommend this. Be sure to have it going where you've got grain. You don't want to have this where you got a bunch of bias. I have this pretty much laid out with the grain of the fabric. And then you just cut all the way around. And if you're going to be using the registration marks, you don't even lift up your template, you keep it down, and then you get your marking pencil, and then you're going to drop it in there, and you're going to go hit all those corners, hit every one of those spots before you even lift up the template. Just get it all marked. And then you should be able to see all your marks. I used the wrong color. I should have used the darker color. On this one I used red. So I did that with this with the red. The yellow doesn't show up very well here. It worked better on my dark blue. Now here's another hint that I also learned. When you're cutting out your triangle pieces, that's this one right here. You only have one registration mark, and that's at the top. And I recommend that you be sure to have this fabric, have this laid out so that it's in a section that it's not going to be stretchy. So if I was to do my cutting out of this triangle, I would probably have it here. I want it on the non-stretchy. This is stretchy, so I wouldn't want my long edge to be on that stretch. I'd want it on the straight of grain. That's this one right here. So this is where I would cut out my triangle. Of course, the directions say to cut it from the wrong side so that you'd be able to mark that point. So be sure to have this edge right here on the straight of grain when you do your cutting. So then you're going to have to cut out 4 triangles per block. You'll have to cut out 4 of the squares. And then the last one is you're going to be getting your fabric and you're going to be cutting now the other 2 pieces. These are the legs. They're exact opposites. Now, if you were doing your LeMoyne star all in the same color, You could probably have your fabric stacked up, wrong sides together as it comes off the bolt and cut these out. Then you'll have your polar opposites. But if you're wanting to have different colors like you see in the examples here, you got to have 4 of one color and 4 of the other colors. So you would have your 4 of this one, and then you would have 4 of this one. So those are how those are laid in there. And these are also cut from the reverse side, wrong side of the fabric. And again, I try to stay with the straighter grain and also laying it out when I had it cut. Now, if you're dealing with a solid, there's really no right side or wrong side on some of them. What I did in laying out my template onto my fabric, I had this edge and this edge on that straight of grain, so the only bias I have is on here and here. So the triangle would have been cut like this. These pieces are cut so that these pieces, the long edges, are on the straight of grain of your fabric here, and then your only bias cuts are going to be here and here. So you're going to be cutting again on the reverse side 4, same thing. You're going to take your pencil before you lift it, and you're going to mark your section, mark them before, and then move on to the next cut. So it's a little bit time consuming, particularly if you want to be sure to get all of your registration marks made. And with a little bit of time and a little bit of practice and a little bit of learning, eventually you'll get to that point where you know as you're sewing exactly where your markings are. So I see here I did this one in red. It showed up a little bit better here on this lighter blue. This one here, I believe I did it in yellow. So there's my dot right there. So that is my registration mark. So after you have all your pieces cut, 4 of the left, 4 of the right, 4 of the triangles, 4 of the squares, that's all the components you need in making your LeMoyne star. So everything else is pretty much all sewing. So the first step you're going to do is you're going to sew the 2 legs together on the long side. Once you get all sets, you'll have 6. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll have 4 full sets. 4 full sets. Then you're going to sew those together, and then you're going to sew those together. After you get all the centerpiece done, so that would be these. After you have all of these sewn, then you go to press. And you want all of your seams going in the same direction. You see how I've got them all here? This one's a little bit of the oddball, but it was going that way. But when you're putting the 2 sections together, you're going to have one that's going to be in the opposite direction. But we don't do any pressing until we get all the legs done. So let's go to the machine. We'll get started on that. So here's my stack of 4 of the 2 colors that I'm working on, and I've got them facing with the dots up. Well, that's the wrong side. So I'm going to be putting the right sides together to sew. So I'm going to go ahead and flip them over. And the instructions show that we need to start sewing from the point here when we go put our 2 pieces together. So here's the 2 I'm going to sew. You start from the point and you're going to stop at the dot. I recommend do a little bit of a back tack either on each end, and definitely when you drop your needle down at that point where you're going to stop here, do a back tack at that dot. Just go back a couple of stitches and then cut your threads and then move on to the next one. This is one that if you wanted to chain piece it, that you could, but because you're needing to start and stop, I recommend not really chain piecing these together. I mean, you could, but because you need to back tack, you really can't, because you've got to cut your thread and move on to the next one. So this is not a chain piecing project. This is one where you're going to do each leg individually. And I want to also point out the instructions talked again about being sure to have this long edge on the straighter grain. So I'm just going to go through the instructions, so I want you to see what I'm looking at here, what you're going to be looking at, and as you're watching this video, putting this together. So I've got my stacks right here beside me, and I've got my 2 pieces that I've got them right sides together, and I'm matching them up, and that's the beauty of the Martelli templates. They actually match up perfectly. And I'm going to start sewing here, 1/4 inch in, maybe do a little back tack, It's not really necessary. And then when I get to my dot, my little registration, that's where I'm going to stop, go back a couple stitches, cut my threads, and move on to the next one. We're going to do that for all 4 of them. I'm looking for that dot to show up where my needle drops right down into there. One more stitch, and now I'm going to back tack. All right, so that's the first one. And it shows where we got that little bitty space right there, where it's not coming all the way to the top, and that's where my Y seam is going to be, where we'll be able to put our 3rd piece in there. So we got the first one done. We'll go ahead and get all these done. Okay, all 4 of them are done. And I'm going to go ahead and just do a light finger pressing, and I'm going to press to the dark side. So you can see where I've sewed all the way down, and then I've got my stopping point. So I'm just going to give it a finger press toward the dark side, not doing any stretching or pulling, just giving it a little press, because now we're going to connect all these together in sets of 2, and then we'll put the 2 halves together. I don't recommend you do really any ironing at this point. You don't want to overstretch it. This is one of those blocks that if you put too much pressure or stretching on it, you could distort the block. So you want to be very careful in your finger pressing. You're not doing a whole lot of pressure. You're not pushing on it or pulling on it or stretching it. Same thing when you're sewing. This is one of those projects that you don't stretch or pull anything because you might get a ripple. You just let the machine feed dogs, just feed it through. That's all you're looking to do. All right, so I've got these 2 all done. So now I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to start connecting the rest of them up. So the next thing is now we're going to be sewing these pieces right here. And you're going to also start at that narrow. Start at the bottom, and if you had pressed them to the dark side, they should nest up. If you pressed them to the dark side, they should nest up for you, but that's not important. The important thing is starting here at the bottom and then stopping at your mark right here. I have to flip it over. So I flipped it over so I could see it a little bit better from the direction I'm sewing. So now I'm going to start here and here. Now here's a hint, and I should have talked about this. You can go ahead and clip off these little dog ears if you feel that they're getting in the way. And we'll just go ahead and do that right now. So I remember how I had pressed them to the dark side. So now I got that little dog ear right here. So go ahead and clip those off. Press it to the dark side, so I've got to clip this one. What that's doing is removing that extra bulk. You really don't need that on there, so I should have said that a minute ago before you start sewing. Go ahead and press it back to the dark side, and then just go ahead and clip off that little bit of bulk. Or whichever side that you're pressing it, you're going to have that little dog ear. It doesn't matter which side, it's going to be there. Because we don't need those. That's just extra, because that's going to be ultimately very center. So get those off of there because it's going to cause some bulk there. Now we're going to go back to put this together. So now we're sewing these shorter seams, place them right sides together. I'm kind of nesting them up as tight as I can right there. Here, I'm nesting that up so that it's nice and tight. And I'm going to start sewing here, and I'm going to come off now onto this dark piece, and I'm going to start at my dot right here. I'm going to do it for both sets. What I'm doing is I'm getting those two seams to nest up really tight so there's no gap in there, because that point, that's the very center of your star. You want all those seams to match up really tight. And then I'm just going to sew from here down to the edge. It keeps moving on me. Maybe one of those times where if you feel you need to use a pin or a clip to hold it in place. Okay, so now you should have the two pieces that looks like this. Press one way, press the other in the opposite. Because now we're going to take these two pieces and now we're going to put them together. So that's why you want one going in one direction, one going in the other direction, because now you're nesting it up right here. Now this is where you could get a pin, if you need a pin to help you, to get to that point, because here's your center right here. And you don't want to cut off your point, and then you've got it right here. You don't want to cut off your point. So you could get a pin and you could put it through on the one side, and you get it right where you want your needle to go down. And then you could go ahead and place it on the other side. And then line up your fabrics. I just have the pin just pushed in. And now I'm moving it. I'm moving my centers into the direction I want them to go. They can go in either direction, but moving them into the directions you want them to go. I'm kind of wanting all of my seams to go in one direction. So I've got my needle dropped in there and I've got it held. Now my needle popped out, so I'm going to go back in here and do that again so that you can see what I'm doing. I'm coming from the back side on the top one, and I'm getting my needle dropped in. And if that's not looking right, so I can get it to right where I want it to be at that point. And then I'm going to put it into the second side, right where I want it to be. I'm shifting my seams so that they nest. And I'm just holding it there. I don't think I'm even going to set the pin down. I'm just going to have that pin just holding it there in that spot. So I've got it laid on here the way I want, and I'm going to start sewing here. And the reason why I think I did that is because now we've got bias. I think if you was to sew from all the way across, you're going to be having some bias pulling because of just the feed dogs just working through the machine. So I think what I had done on my first sample that I had ever done was I started from the point, the center, and sewed to the edge, then flipped it over and from the center and to the edge. And I think that's what the instructions say to do. Yep, it says when sewing the two halves together, start at the center and sew to the outside registration mark, flip it over and do it again. So let's do what the instructions tell us. All right, so I got it there, lined up exactly how I want it. I'm going to get it under my machine, and then I'm going to pull out that needle. Make sure all of my legs are out of the way. There we go. And then I'll line it up, see where I'm going to be getting to, where I got to see my registration mark to stop. One more stitch. All right, then we're going to flip it over. And I'm going to come in just a little bit, you know, maybe start probably start right here and then just sew off to the other end. All right, so let's take a look and see how we did. Right there on the mini. Now here's the thing. Now we got to press this open. I recommend that you press from the back side when you go to pressing, because you kind of want to, and that's why it was so important to do some of that finger pressing, because it's kind of going to lay in the direction that you want each one of your seams to go. The problem I'm having right here, there is a lot of bulk right here. And if you wouldn't have trimmed off those dog ears, then you would have had much more to work with here. So it wants to rotate around this way, but it kind of can't have this one rotate that way if you've got, this is for your final seam. I had thought about pressing it open, but I just don't think it will even lay to pressing it open. So the best thing to do is you're going to have one seam that's going to be going in the opposite direction of all the other seams. So I wanted to know that that was important for you to know, because it's near impossible to get them all to go all the way around and not cause a problem in the center because of all the bulk that's there. So choose which side you want, because you want all of them to go rotating around in one direction except one. One is going to be going in the opposite direction because of that final seam that you have right here. So I'm going to go ahead and get this to iron real quick, and then I'll be right back. And now we're going to work on the insetting the triangles, and then we'll do the squares. Okay, so this is the one that I had done earlier. This was the first one I had done for the demonstration for today. And I was talking to you about how the seams are all going in one direction except one. This one here just would not lay in the direction of the spinning of these pieces right here. And because there is so much bulk right here, I just let it go in the direction that it wanted. And so I had, so it lays nice and flat, and you can see my points really good right here. So it gives me a good spin. Now this one, the reason why we're filming the ironing process, because this one worked a little bit differently. It is recommended in the instructions that you actually iron from the back side first, and that's why it was so important to do that little bit of a finger press, because it kind of will help you in getting your seams to go all in the direction that you want to go. But this one actually wanted, here's my final seam right here, the final seam where I joined the two together, and I was thinking that it was all going to one's going to be wanting to flip over to the other side, but actually this one is playing nice and wants to spin with the rest of them going in the same direction. So I guess it's going to be a matter of what your fabric is saying to you, what it wants to do, because this one spins really nice, and it even still gives me a nice flat center. And again, just talking about that center, that's where a big chunk of your bulk, because you have a lot of fabric that's going right there. So don't do no stretching or pulling, just let the fabric move through the machine as the machine pulls it through. And now we got everything all ready to go to do your, and I just always try to press with the straighter grain. That's another thing. I'm looking at the grain of the fabric going this way, and I'm going this way, or I'm just pressing. I'm not rolling it all over the place. I'm just letting them press it out. So now we're at the point where now we're going to put these sections right here, and then we're going to finish off with the squares. All right, so here's the triangle that we're going to be getting into this section right here. It's a lot easier than what you think. So this is what we're wanting to have it finish into here. So the first thing you do is you're going to take it and you're just going to line it up, and you're going to sew from here to the dot. You're going to sew from the point, and you're going to stop at the dot, back tack, and then we'll do the other side. It's a lot easier. This was so, I was always intimidated too, but this one actually goes together quite nicely. So you're just matching up the points on the small end, and you're going to sew till you get to that little dot. As you're coming along here, the corner or the very tip of the triangle is going to actually come right there to the corner or the edge of the piece that you're sewing it to. So it should line up right there to that very edge. But you're not going to be sewing to there, you're going to be stopping at your registration mark. So it's going to line up and it's going to come right there to the very, at the top of the peak of the triangle. It's going to be right there where the leg starts to go down to the straight edge. So it's going to go corner to corner. Okay. Now the second section, so you've got it sewed to there. So now you're just going to kind of flip it over. And now you're going to line it up the point here. And this is kind of going to move out of its way right here, but you're going to sew now to the dot on the other side. And you'll find that the peak should pretty much line up the exact same way. Just kind of have your other fabric out of the way, just pulled out of the way, and stop at that dot, and it should be all good to go. There you go. Once you get from edge to the dot, you're going to have a nice, perfect seam. Now the seam will just lay pretty much like this. This one will kind of go over and then it'll be laying like that. I don't think it goes up, I think it goes down. But when you go to iron it, you'll get it laid out the way you want it to lay out. So that's the first one, all sewn to all the edges, all to the dot. We'll get the next one done. You're going to repeat that 4 times. Kind of lining it up, pull in the piece that you just sewed back a little bit, lining up your edges, and then sewing to the dot. That's just kind of the most fiddly part is right here. And it's also like that on the squares too. Oh, I'm glad that happened. So I went 1 stitch in too much. You see that? 1 stitch too much, gave me that little bitty pleat. So there's a fix for that. It was right here when I was sewing it on, and I kind of knew I had gone just 1 stitch past that dot. So what I did when I saw that happen before, I just clipped it at that last stitch and pulled it out just a little bit because I had back tacked it there. So I pulled out that 1 stitch. You see it right here? So now once I clipped that last stitch that I had done, I went just beyond, and now it's nice and flat again. That took out that little pleat. So don't get frustrated if you find that you got that little pleat in there. That's just because you did 1 stitch too many and it got into the other part of the peak. You just clip that last little stitch and then move on to the next one. Again, flip it over, line up the second side, pull that out of the way, line up your edges and your points, and then sew down to the next mark. Now I want you to see what happened here. So what happened was when I went to touch my reverse button, it didn't play nice, so it went all the way forward. So that means it stitched all the way through. So the best way to fix this is to take all of those little stitches out and then go back and back tack right there where your dot is. but it went over and beyond where I wanted it to go. So I just cut my threads, and now I'm just going to pull out those last few stitches because it just kind of raced away from me when I did that. I'm just going to pull out those little stitches there, and what I'm going to do is, after I got my stitches out, so that I still have some strength there, I'm going to go ahead and check it first, make sure it's all nice the way I want it to be. So I'm just going to lay this back under the sewing machine, and I'm just going to do a back tack, just do a securing stitch right here, since I didn't get to do my back tack before it raced off on me. So I'm just going to touch that up with a little bit of a couple extra stitches. All right, so there you are. That should be doing it all good as new. Yeah, good as new. All right, one more of the triangles to go, and then we'll go to adding the blocks, the squares. Now here's something, when you've pre-cut your fabric, just don't do a lot of handling. See what's happening here? It's got handled a lot as I'm moving from area to area, so it's starting to fray. So when you're going to do your quilt, do your project, don't put it aside for a long period of time if you're going to be moving it around or handling it, because your edges will fray, because that's that straight of grain, and it's just releasing itself. It's fraying up on me. I'm going to try something different. I'm going to line it up just to see what it would do. So I'm going to start at the dot and go out to the edge and see if it makes a difference. So I'm just going to drop my needle down at the dot. See if it can be done this way too. A couple stitches forward. Couple stitches back, and then sew to the edge. It's always good to try different ways to see how they work out for you. All right, so let's see if that one did just as good. Let's see, I see it has a pleat in it, so that didn't work out well. Figure out where the pleat's coming from. Right here. There you go. So I had a little bit of a pleat. I took out that stitch, saw where the gap was, and got it all smoothed out. So just take your time, and everything is all nice and smooth. Now I don't even go to the iron at this point. Now we're going to go straight to doing the squares. All right, so here's the triangles that we did earlier, and this is one of the squares that we want to look like when you're all done. So you're going to do this square, and you're going to repeat it for all 4 pieces. And when you have the last square in, you are done. So I'm going to go ahead and go to this one right here, and I'm going to show you how I did it. So what I did was I got my fabric, I didn't iron it, and I'm just kind of pushing how these pieces are. So I see I've got this little dog ear here. So you're going to, on the sides that you're getting ready to do, you're going to want to trim off those dog ears here, and you're going to want to trim off this one. And I do that as I'm going all the way around. So I've got my dog ears out of the way, because you're going to be putting your square in right here. So the first side, you're just going to lay it down on top, and you will ignore if you put your registration marks all the way around, you only need the registration mark that's going to be down here on the bottom. So ignore that registration mark. You're going to sew right over that, because only the one that's important is the one that's going to be here at the intersection. So we're going to go ahead and sew this down 1/4 inch and stop when we get to the dot on the other end. If you want, you could go ahead and back tack that piece and sew all the way down till you get to the dot. So you want to make sure that the leg of the star is kind of out of the way, and you're lining it up onto your fabric, and you're going to stop when you get to the registration dot at the bottom. It's right there's my dot, so I'm going to go ahead and sew to that point, making sure the other part of the leg is out of the way. Get right on it, and then back tack a couple of stitches. Just like we did for the triangle. So we stopped at the registration right there. So now we're going to take it, and now we're going to take these two pieces, and we're going to put our right sides together, just like we did for the triangle. But now we're going to flip it over, and we're going to be sewing it from the back side. So I clipped my dog ear off right here. So now I'm going to start sewing here, and I'm going to sew all the way to that registration mark down here, making sure that this part of the leg is out of the way. So we're closing in that gap. You can back tack a little bit and then just go on down. It will line up perfectly. I see my registration dot right there. So I'm going to sew right to it and then take a step back. Let's see how well we did. Look at that, absolutely perfect. And you're just going to repeat that all the way around. Then you're going to take it over to your ironing table, and you're going to flip it over, and then you're just going to iron it in the direction that you see your fabric's wanting to go, and make it nice and flat. Flip it over, make it nice and flat. Just follow the grains of the way your fabric is. Don't stretch it and pull it, and it'll lay out perfect. So here it is, the finished block that we just did. I hope you enjoyed making the LeMoyne star with me. It's just one of those great blocks that a lot of people are intimidated to try because it's got that Y seam. Well, with the Martelli template, it makes it so much easier because every single piece is cut perfectly, and we've got those registration marks in there. Just follow the instructions on the back, watch my video, and it'll walk you through everything that you need to do to make this project simple and easy and fast for you. And again, just follow the simple tips that I had about when you're pressing, when you're ironing, when you are putting it together, when you're sewing it, don't stretch or pull, and that way your block will lay nice and flat at the end of every single piece that you do. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at quiltingwithlisa@gmail.com, and be sure to go to martellinotions.com and pick up your LeMoyne star block set today.